diagnostic control room, thousands of knobs, VU meters, all to bring the pear-shaped tones of the Vox Humana. I see today when there'll be transistorized pieces of equipment that will allow you to control your own personality. Yeah, you can set it for the day. You know, you can say, kindly, genial, yet incisively dictatorial. I mean, if you're a boss. Well, you know, I've really often wondered, and it's never happened to me in my life, I've wondered how it feels to be a boss. I really do. I've never, of course, being, you know, the artistic type, being an artist, and I say that advisedly, I've never been, you know, I've never been blessed with bossism. I've often wondered, by the way, if for those of you who, you know, think it's real rough in this country, I mean, taxes, strife, the whole bit, listen to this little tiny note way down at the bottom of one of the columns in the New York Times. Way down at the bottom. It's an Associated Press note from Bombay. And listen, I've been to Bombay, and listen, ooh, wow, is that a hot town? Whew, I mean, temperature-wise. Bombay, India. Income tax bills provoked 3 fatal heart attacks, according to R.J. Vakil, director of the Indian Heart Foundation. You know, people tend to think of other countries as being so nice and simple, you know, no problem. And can you see this guy standing there in his dhoti? And he's in his little house, and the income tax form comes in. Oh, what you want? That's the end of the ball game. But you know, it's that way all over. And incidentally, speaking of you know, this whole absurd world we're living in, I think that more and more, you know, the world has always been absurd. You know, people tend to think that we are now living in an increasingly absurd world. I say, no, we're living in a world of increasing communications, media, which makes people more aware of the absurd world. Now, for example, 100 years ago, I would never have known that 3 Indians died of heart attacks getting their income tax. Never have known that in a you know, million years. Because, as a matter of fact, you know, the idea of international news is comparatively recent. Do you know that? I mean, actual international news. That 100 years ago, a boat would arrive after a voyage of, say, 2 months, and about all it would carry would be a few newspapers and some letters. And it would maybe go for years before anybody heard that there was a major war being waged in Bulgaria or something like that. And so the whole idea of absurdity is not a new idea. It's an old idea. In fact, Aristophanes wrote a play based on the whole concept of absurdities. I mean, the life of the absurd life of the human being. Now, what is absurdity? You know, that's a good question to ask yourself. You know, when you say you're living an absurd life, that assumes that there is an alternative. Well, then you know, then you have to start questioning, what does the word absurd mean? You know, what does it mean? I suppose, of course, you see, since we're a creature of both passions and intellect, we are a creature that's capable of both a conceived idea and sometimes carrying it through, which is quite rare. We're also capable of uncontrollable, because they are instinctual, behavior patterns, which are not logical and have very little basis in the mind. And so the mind is constantly fighting with the passion, you know. And so I believe that the only truly realistic drama is a comedy. I mean, I really believe that, because I've seen many a serious drama, and they just don't work like that in life. I mean, all due respect to Death of a Salesman, it just doesn't. It isn't that way in real life. And everybody's lived with some kind of a Willy Loman, you know, in one way or another. And Willy Loman isn't tragic. He just goes to the bowling alley, and that's the end of it. And it isn't. What I'm trying to say here is that you see a lot more truth in life, in a lot of things that are called trivial comedies. In fact, comedy humor has always been. Have you noticed that humor writing, for example, even though it's not as seriously taken at the time it's written, people don't put much importance on it. Because if you laugh at something, that's not considered serious. You're not relevant. You notice that very few folk singers ever laugh. It's always very somber and solid. And yet, the writing about mankind, when you deal with mankind, if you're... most people try to shy away from the word mankind today. They like to deal with one specific group. They'll attack this party, or attack that party, or this country, or that country. But when you're dealing with mankind, you can hardly help but deal with it in humorous terms, because it is funny. And some of the great writing of all time, I mean, the stuff that lasts forever, is almost invariably funny. For example, Voltaire, Candide, this is very funny, if you read Voltaire. Don Quixote, Cervantes, it's very funny. This is hundreds of years old. And yet there were a lot of other things written at the time that were probably considered much more relevant at the time. And they kept saying, what is this Cervantes writing about this guy riding around fighting the windmills? Come on, this is ridiculous, irrelevant writing. And yet, he was really writing about much more than it seemed to be at the time. I'd say this is undoubtedly true of Swift. Certainly true of, even more than that, probably more sneakily so, Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll's Parables, his Tea Party, is a classic example of a summit conference. And, I mean, beautifully realized all the way down the line. And if you ever think anything's ever going to come out of a summit conference, forget it. It never has, nor ever will. And so these guys who nobody took very seriously were really saying it for everybody. Ultimately, at the time, it didn't seem so. And I think that the other night, for example, I'm watching Edgar Kennedy. You know, I'm amazed at how well the Edgar Kennedy two-act, the little two-reel cartoon, they're not cartoons, these little comedies, how beautifully they've aged. They're fantastic. I mean, they're funnier now, I guess, looking at them now, than they were at the time. For example, there was one great Edgar Kennedy, because he lived in a world of the absurd, where he attempted always to make things work. And there was a constant nudging little thing always going vaguely wrong. Yeah, by the way, are you... I think that all of us have a deep nostalgia for Utopia. Utopia. This is why we feel the world is absurd, because Utopia keeps eluding our grasp. We can conceive of a utopia, but then as soon as we build it, we sprain our ankle, see, when we're walking up the steps to Utopia. And one guy gets halfway up, see, and he suddenly realizes that he forgot his camera, his Instamatic. He turns around, bumps into the guy behind him, and the next thing you know, you got a fist fight on the steps of Utopia. And this bugs us because it really enrages people. It enrages people because we can conceive of utopia, not really. One man's utopia, friend, is another man's hell. That's another problem. Yes, and unfortunately, you know, some people are drawn towards communal life. They love the idea of all of them together singing and tromping on the grapes. And it's a great idea, you see. Because it's you know it constantly reiterates itself, the idea of and always you notice that utopian concepts invariably have a patriarchal leader over them who is totally good, infinite good. He is not capable even of human passions like jealousy, rage, pride, greed, none of those things. See? And he is this great patriarch who exists over all of them. And this runs through many utopian ideas. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest examples of that is Lost Horizon. Do you remember Lost Horizon with Ronald Colman when he finally finds this little? You notice that only works in a little tiny country. He finally arrives in Shangri-La, and that's where Shangri-La got its name. If many of you probably use the word Shangri-La, I mean talking about younger generation types, and don't know the word Shangri-La came from a novel that in fact made into a great movie. But the novel was about this guy who was in an airplane with another group of people, and they crashed way high in the Tibetan mountains somewhere. and we assume it was the Tibetan mountains. And after a tremendous struggle in this great snowstorm, they finally arrive at this fantastic country where everybody is beautiful, everything is truth and good, and nothing but the sound of bells in the distance, and lovely people walking about wearing togas. And it was, in other words, utopia. It was a dream utopia. And the hero goes to this place, and he suddenly realizes, here it is. You see, this is it. And he attempts to escape. And then when he gets outside, or somebody gets outside, and they're destroyed by the outside world. And, of course, the outside world's always evil. And so he returns to Utopia, and this great patriarch is there. He's hundreds of years old. In fact, this place is so beautiful that people live forever. You see, this is so utopian. And that the old man, or they live almost forever, so the old man is about to die, the old utopian patriarch. And he is passing his scepter around to our hero, Ronald Colman, whom we know also will be a beautiful person who will not have any of the normal human failings, like greed, lust. All the 7 deadly sins are not part of Mr. Coleman's makeup, which makes him a Superman. Speaking of, this is WOR New York, and one of our great American Supermen is marching, Dr. Pepper.
Hey, all you have to do to like it is try it. Hey, all you have to do to like it is try it. Dr. Pepper, oh, it's so good. Dr. Pepper, oh, it's so good. Dr. Pepper, yeah, Dr. Pepper, the most misunderstood soft drink in America. All right.
Dr. Pepper may be America's most misunderstood soft drink, but not for long.
National Airlines says you're gonna have a great
Yeah, National Airlines is back, and if you think you're glad, man, imagine how glad National feels. They're raring to go, ready to prove how much they've missed you. And here are 10 great reasons to fly National. 1, Miami. 2, Fort Lauderdale. 3, Tampa. 4, Jacksonville. 5, Saratoga. 6, Hessville, Indiana. 7, Orlando. 8, Daytona Beach. 9, Baltimore. 10, Charleston. National Airlines is back, all right, Dad, and they're all set for you. You. Come on, sing it, gang. You, sing it. Come on and have a happy.
Come on and have a happy.
Happy.
Come on and have a
Great flight. Yeah. National Airlines says you're gonna have a great flight. Dun. Just ask your travel agent or call National Airlines. In the mysterious code that was created by Mr. Morse, we just sent the symbolic name out over thousands of millions of miles of airwaves. Year 1. Heaven, earth, rock, Beatles, sound, time come together at the kingdom of rock. Oh, you like that, friend? If you have not seen this poster, you have not seen posters. And for $2, it's probably the biggest $2 you'll spend in a long time. In fact, come to think of it, the average guy will spend $2 on a cheeseburger and a bad glass of diet root beer. So for $2, you put this on the top of your pad and you go out of your bird. No, it's a beautiful poster, and all kidding aside, it's really genuinely worth the $2. It's one of the wildest things I've ever seen. By the way, it's not sold in stores. So this is a true status symbolico. That's from the Sicilian, of course. Send $2 in check or money order. Do not send cash. $2 in check or money order, and don't send it to us. Send it to Year 1, 460 West 34th Street, New York, Mystic, zip code number 1 0 0 0 1. Yeah, it's scary. And I'll tell you, you don't risk a thing. They'll send your dough back if you're not flipped out of your bird. Send now. Let's see, we have Great Shanghai with us tonight. And if you're casting about idly this weekend here in this great, fantastic city of fun, we would like to suggest that you make it up to 103rd and Broadway, the old Great Shanghai up there. One of the this incidentally is one of the most famous, one of the great old line Oriental restaurants in New York. If you don't know about Great Shanghai, hundreds of thousands of Columbia students have scoffed at the Great Shanghai throughout all time, and we would like to recommend you drop by there. This is at 103rd and Broadway. They have their great Shanghai brunch, which goes from 11 until 3 every Sunday. And for $2.50, you can have your choice of 6 fantastic entrees, a whole bit. Eat all you want. And that they mean it. Eat all you want. And some people make a total pig of themselves. And if you're a kid under 4 feet tall, you get in for half price. Okay? Great Shanghai, 103rd and Broadway, this Sunday, 11 to 3. You know, this utopian concept, if you don't mind if I bore you more about this, because this has harassed people for years. You notice that to go even further than that, I mean, to talk about the idea, you know, I'm not trying to be a profound pundit here, but anybody who's read a lot, and I have done that. I mean, yeah, I'm almost a compulsive reader. I find myself reading the labels on Castoria bottles, you know, that kind of stuff. But if you're a compulsive reader, oh, sure, you know, I tell you, it's discouraging. I find myself when I'm in a subway station or someplace, you know, and I don't have anything to read, I find myself reading the instructions on the frozen pineapple juice machine. You know, how to fix the 3-phase motor on the and it's, you know, it's discouraging. But when you've read a great deal, you realize there's one recurring theme that runs through fiction, and that's the utopian theme. It recurs continually. You find it in The Land of Oz, for example, is a great example of that. There have been more than one Erewhon concept where a man creates a land that is perfect in all respect, and all human faults, failings have somehow been magically erased, and the people are all beautiful. This, of course, is also an inhuman concept, even though most people like to think of it as a humane concept. It really is inhuman, because if you don't tolerate man, then you're inhuman, really. And to not understand his failings is to be inhuman. And incidentally, this is why many utopians turn into raging, just fantastically tyrannical dictators when they finally get in, because they become enraged at the fact that they cannot erase human failings. And they're not really failings, they're human characteristics. And so he winds up by continually throwing people in jail who show the various little human failings, again, the human condition, and he winds up with nothing but people in jail. And he's this tyrant. And of course, this happens in many, many cases, and has happened. For example, you know, they have a continual outpouring of capitalism in Russia. Yeah, they're constantly throwing guys in jail. In the most recent case, they discovered a ring of guys and people. There's a whole lot of them. A ring of people who were hiding in their basements making contraband lipstick. And because you see, human vanity being what it is, everybody wants to look great. The idea of getting cosmetics is difficult in Russia. There's very little cosmetics produced, and yet people want to look great. So there's always somebody willing to provide them with the wherewithal. So the guys are down in the basement making lipstick, and I mean, as innocent as that, and they wound up with like 30 years in jail apiece for being contraband capitalists. But this will continually pop up all the time. No matter where you go, humanity is humanity. And so throughout literature, which incidentally you can control, that's the beautiful part. That's why some people wind up they read their life away. I've known people who literally read their life away because you can create perfection in literature. And you can create very distinct things in literature. Good guys are very easily spotted in literature. I mean, they are there. Bad guys are very easily spotted, which is even better because most people think of themselves as good guys. So you really have to identify villains. And so villains are very easily identifiable in most fiction. And the more popular it is, the more easily the villain is identified. And so in today's literature, you find the most popular literature is that which identifies the evil, and that's in caps, the most obviously and continuously and relentlessly. For example, there's no question who the villain is in Portnoy's complaint. Mother. And Mother gets no short shrift all down the line. So that makes it even, if Mother at any point, if there was any extenuating circumstances in Mother's life in this novel, it wouldn't be as popular. Then it would confuse people. They don't want to hear this. Catch-22. The Army is relentlessly idiotic. And so it becomes very popular because it's you can easily identify the enemy, and it doesn't confuse you with any grays. There's no in-betweens. And so, and also political leaders tend to be almost judged by their popularity as to how clean-cut, simple, and easily they can define the enemies. And so you will find a guy rising to great heights simply because he tells the people, this is the enemy. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. This is the enemy. Once we get rid of that enemy, life will be utopia. We'll all be living in Shangri-La. Hitler's a classic example of that. And so you find that happening in our country. The dynamic leaders, many of them, are guys who can point to an enemy very cleanly and say, this is the enemy. Now, you may call the enemy is quite often very amorphous. I mean, in fact, it almost always is, because the minute you start getting specific, then you got fist fights. And so it's an amorphous group. For example, if you're on one side of the political fence, it's the long-hair intellectuals. Now, that's one group. You hear many politicians saying if it wasn't for the long-hair intellectuals, life would be groovy. Then, on the other hand, you have another group that says life would be groovy if it wasn't for that ridiculous silent majority out there of clods. And that's another. See, that's one of those great catchphrases which makes people feel warm, because then they can identify the enemy. And, of course, they're not part of it, naturally. They're not one of the silent ones. On the other hand, the guy that follows the one that's fighting the long-hair intellectuals, he doesn't consider himself one of those either. And so you wind up with these nicely definable, but yet amorphous enemies. And this is a continuing problem, because we're all after utopia. And the reason that we keep getting frustrated in our utopian concepts is that, of course, utopia is also amorphous and cannot be defined. One person will think of utopia as a great Howard Johnson in the sky, you know, where all flavors are there. All 28 flavors are always obtainable. It's air conditioned, and you can get there's no line for the John. Everything is groovy, and there's nothing but beautiful music playing forever. Now, there are people who will think of heaven as that way, you see. Then there are others who who would go out of their stark raving bird if they were subjected to that kind of life. Now, on the other hand, you see, this is one of the great problems, too, is that many people really love the idea of communal behavior. They love being with a group of people marching, singing. And this is their idea of, utopia. On the other hand, you have many, many people who are solitary types, individuals, who do not like the idea. They can't. They just don't dig the scene of marching, singing, and tramping grapes. They want to be better, and so you have this constant clash between one guy who believes in everyone squatting in a circle around the fire playing the guitar, and the other guy who says, "Not for me. I want to go to my tent and read a book, or I want to go to my tent and contemplate the stars." And so you have these two vastly differing attitudes towards your own private life. And ultimately, one or the other group has to get suppressed when one or the other winds up in the ascendancy. That's always called repression, then. And so this is a complex issue here, and the idea of utopia. And you hear people reiterating it over and over again. Incidentally, if you notice now that the current utopians, what stands I would suspect that the difference between the current utopians and utopians of earlier days is the utopians of earlier days outlined their concept of a utopia. They really did. They would say, this is the way our utopia will work, and they'd even have it down to the last bushel of wheat, who would tromp the grain, and so forth down the line. And they attempted to always, there was a continual attempt to create these utopian communities. New Harmony, Indiana, New Friendship, Indiana, Brook Farm. All these are 19th century utopian communities, which eventually exploded into human frailties again. You know, everybody talks about free love until you find somebody in bed with your chick. Then there's a fist fight. And this this is exactly what happened to many of them. You aware of that, Al? One of the most famous cases of that happened right here on the East Coast in one of the intellectual utopian communities. But nevertheless, in other words, free love is a concept. It ain't my chick. So you wind up with this constant battle between concepts and reality. And the difference between today's utopian and the older utopian, when I say older, I'm talking about historically older, is that the utopian people today are, in much more general terms, it's a utopia. They want a better utopia. They want a utopian world. They want a better world. They keep using the word better world, a saner system, and they go on and on. But there's never any outlining of what specifically it will be. And that is, of course, the safest way to do it. Because if you ever outline your idea of a utopia, you're going to find everybody, including your own crowd, disagreeing. So just, we want a utopia, that's it. And it'll come after we blow everything up, then it will happen. Well, this is fascinating. It's an interesting idea. It's a kind of a concept of creative Armageddon. However, nevertheless, this history will finally tell what will all happen on this, of course. But you know, if you've read a great deal, you find that this utopian concept is extremely popular. This is the basis, incidentally, of a large body of science fiction. This is one of the reasons why so many people are really hooked on science fiction, because there are hundreds of different types of utopian worlds continually being sketched in science fiction. And people love this idea. You get drawn into it. And also, one of the reasons why you find many people becoming involved in utopian religions, for example, is that this also holds out a promise of utopia to them. And so they will reject the real world. Many Oriental religions, you see, are utopian in concept, that you will wind up in this great Shangri-La someplace, providing you do the right things here and so forth. And this is always a continuing, recurring thing in man's life, this search for utopia. You know, part of the utopian concept is also a misreading of nature. You notice the word nature has become very big with people today. The idea of nature is a utopian idea. People believe that if you get back to nature, you will be back in utopia. The Garden of Eden, in other words, the return to Garden of Eden. And this is always intriguing, and yet man's world, of course, this is largely based on the misreading of nature. Most people have had very little, in today's 20th century urban world, have had very little experience with nature. Their idea of nature is a national forest, a state park. That's nature. But actually, that's about as much nature as the average backyard in Bergenfield, New Jersey. The idea of nature is always a benign thing to most people, because again, you carry your technology into nature and you control nature wherever you are, or at least you try to. But this is one of the reasons why so many people are continually referring to nature today. And I'm not talking in this case about ecology. Incidentally, there's another fascinating concept of utopia, that many people really believe that we can return to pristine primal nature and still have man. And they're really almost contradictory. In fact, are. Man being what he is. Man is not an animal. If you believe of man as an animal, then it's possible. If you think that man can live in he can actually live and flourish without clothing, living totally naked and alone in the jungle, then it is possible, I guess, to return to primal nature. But man will not tolerate that. He's something else again. Now, I think that it's funny how many people how different people are who live on farms, who have lived on farms, and who have lived amid birth and death and nature, as far as we know, tornadoes and hurricanes. How different they are in their attitude towards this utopian concept than the guy who lives all of his life in the city. They're almost the negative reverse. They're like mirror images, reversed images of one another. For example, the average guy who lives on the farm, his idea of utopia is the city. In fact, there were even songs written about how you're going to keep them down on the farm once they have seen Paris. That means, they just are not going to buy the farm after living for a while in the big city. And so millions of people yearn out in the farms, in the wilderness, to come to the big city. They really do. There's a great yearning. And this is one of the reasons why the cities are so overcrowded today, because in the late 40s and early 50s, when affluence began to set into the country, people could finally make that switch. They could finally say, the hell with Marcellus, Michigan, and they hop on a train, and where do they come to? Yorkville. And so, here you've got this great number of people. I wonder how many are listening tonight who made the great transition. And so now you've got great numbers of people on the opposite, all living here in the middle of the city, who yearn for the farm. They yearn for the idea of being out on a farm someplace, and they conceive of it as a utopia. That's the way it's going to be groovy when I get out there. And of course, you find great flaws in both. We all know the flaw in the city thinking, all of us who are listening here tonight, because we're in it. But let me tell you, you talk to people who've lived in the farm life for any length of time, and they'll tell you the other flaws. For example, one of the great flaws that you don't find here too much in New York, you may find a lot of things in New York, but it's pretty hard to find boredom. Whereas boredom is a tremendous factor in people's lives when they live way out on the outskirts of nothing. And they tend to begin to accept completely for granted the things which we think are great. For example, beautiful skies, a beautiful lake, a hill with woods on it. They tend to get completely blasé about that, and it means nothing to them. Just as we here in New York, the more you live in New York, you become completely blasé about the things that he finds fantastic, like the shows. I just wonder how many people who live in New York haven't been to a Broadway show in 10 years. It just doesn't do anything to them, They don't go to the museums. They don't go to the fancy restaurants. I just wonder how many people are living 20 minutes away from the greatest restaurants in the world and spend all of their time, opening Campbell's soup and eating cheese sandwiches. Because we take this thing we've got here completely for granted, and hence it really doesn't exist then for us. It's irrelevant. Anything you take for granted is irrelevant, ultimately. It doesn't mean anything. And so you yearn for the sky. And the guy sitting out in the farm, he yearns for Barbra Streisand. and you get this terrible mixed up feeling when you realize that both sides are right, and yet both are tragically wrong. And so the concept of utopia, and by the way, you notice how many people think of utopia now in America, and you find this in every country I've ever been. You find everybody believes that a utopia is found in another country. You find many people saying, "Oh, if I could only get out of the country, I'd move to Spain, or I'd live in the Greek Isles." And this great concept of the other countries are utopians, and utopias. And when you go there, you find that the people in these countries, I've never found one yet, who didn't feel that if he could only get away from here and get to X, and you'd be surprised how often it is America. If I could only get to X, life would really begin. I heard Romans say it. A guy in New Delhi. I was in New Delhi in a hotel, and this kid, he was about 19, started to talk to me, and we talked for hours. And his greatest concept, his greatest dream, the greatest dream he could conceive of in life, would be to come to America and go to Cornell. He had a thing about Cornell. Now, he couldn't really tell me why it was Cornell, but he had an idea that, he wanted to go to Cornell. And yet I'm sure there are millions of kids who are going to Cornell or living in America whose greatest idea, whose idea of the greatest thing that could happen to them would be to go to Benares or to India. And so you find this constant yearning on the part of people for a utopia, which is always somewhere else. It is never where you are. And so no matter where you go, I remember one time in the middle of the Tyrolean Alps, which are just incredibly beautiful. They're so beautiful that you couldn't believe that anything could be this beautiful. The climate, everything is just fantastic. And yet, it was out of that area that the greatest mass cruel movement of the world, at least in the 20th century, as known yet, came. This is where the real birth of Nazism marched, and a lot of them said that it was because of boredom. They were, it's very boring living there. They feel cut off from the rest of the world, and the world is putting them down. And it's fantastic what happens to people in utopia. And when you get into utopian ideas, you find it's almost a study in human frustration. A study in human frustration. And there are words, of course, that are continually used in connection with utopia. They're buzzwords. You know what a buzzword is? Well, a buzzword is a word that turns people on, and it really may be meaningless, but it's a buzzword. It turns you on. And here are some of the utopian buzzwords. Love. Utopian concepts are always bound up with that word love. That's a buzzword in utopian lexiconography. Free. That's another buzzword. Free. Together. That's another. And by the way, those two words are almost self-contradictory. Free and together. They cancel each other's out. The minute you're with a lot of people, you ain't going to be free. It's just the way it is. And so these are various buzzwords that have run through continually through utopian ideas. And I remember reading Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, which is one of the great classic studies of utopia, and incidentally one of the great ironical stories of all time, because it really says it, that the center of the Wizard of Oz, if you recall it, was the Emerald City. The Emerald City was this magnificent capital of the Wizard of Oz. And Oz was divided into 4 groups. And incidentally, if you remember Oz, they were very segregated. 4 countries, the Munchkins and the Gillikins, and they all looked different from each other. The Munchkins looked different from the Gillikins, and so on down the line. There were 4 nations within Oz, and they all were very definitely segregated, which I don't know what it says, but I suspect that most people think in terms of a utopia that is segregated, curiously enough. You notice many of the black leaders believe this, and many of the white leaders of another persuasion believe that too, that we often ascribe evil to another race. This is a continual problem throughout all of history. And so in Oz, the 4 lands existed, all in beautiful peace, of course. Naturally, they had a little evil. There was the Wicked Witch of the West, and there was the Good Queen of the East, which was also beautiful too. And Dorothy, coming from the outside, was the infidel. Dorothy came in from the outside. She came from Kansas, and she suddenly landed in the middle of all this in her house. And her house, by the way, delightfully enough, and when it landed, crushed the Wicked Witch of the West. So then she was a great savior in Oz. And the next thing you know, she is now on a pilgrimage to the capital city of Oz, which was the Emerald City, which was reached by the yellow brick road. You notice yellow is the color of gold, and they would march through various terrible barriers to get to Oz, or to get to the Emerald City. There was the poppies, the field of poppies that made you go to sleep forever, and so forth. And she got these people all along the way she went, friends who had to go to Oz too, because in the center of Oz was the wizard. Now, most people believe in the idea of a wizard, that somewhere there is a perfect politician. He's magnificent, he looks beautiful, he says great thoughts, he is incapable of any of the human failings, and he can do anything. He's magical. He can produce desired results without causing unhappiness on the part of anybody. He's, in short, magical. He can do these great things. And so, as they progressed slowly towards Oz, this great capital, Dorothy got more and more excited as she moved towards the Emerald City, the fabled Emerald City that was made totally out of emeralds. It was the most beautiful city in the world, and she was going to see the great wizard himself. And finally she stood in the throne room, a tiny figure against this fantastic throne, where the wizard was so beautiful and so brilliant to look upon that he had to hide behind an enormous mask. And then they began to ask their wishes of the wizard. The Tin Woodman, the Cowardly Lion, the Scarecrow, Dorothy herself. And then came the great realization. The wizard was a humbug, a little tiny sleight-of-hand trickster who had given everybody in the Emerald City green glasses to wear so that they would believe they were living in a city made of emeralds, and he couldn't do anything for anybody. This little tiny fake, and the middle of it all was the humbug. And it was only then that Dorothy realized that there is no Emerald City. There is no great one man who can solve all problems and do all good things to all people. She began to see that maybe there were a few things that she had missed about Kansas. It wasn't so bad after all. And Aunt Em and the whole crowd. And so the constant pursuit of utopia goes on and on and on and on. And maybe one of the reasons why it's risen to such a crescendo in our time is because utopia is seen quite often by millions of us. It's on television. The beautiful homes that Brian Keith lives in that fantastically, strangely utopian serial where all men have wonderful, kindly butlers who never strike for more wages. The land where Doris Day lives. The land where, well, they all live. The land where it's all action. Everybody knows and it's fun. Johnny Carson land, where no dull guests ever show up in your house. Yes, maybe that's one of the reasons why we're driving more and more towards the Emerald City. And, of course, finally electing the great humbug.